Commissioner Verghese, it's such a pleasure to speak to you, to have you on the Cuts Adda. If you look at the post-COVID world, what would you think are the most critical issues that impact the global community and, of course, Australia?
Well, Ahmed, firstly, let me say how nice it is to talk with you again, and thank you for the opportunity to appear on your Cuts Adda program. Look, COVID, I think, was an accelerator rather than a novel shaper of a new world. And so when it finally ends, or we come to grips with it or learn to live with it, we will be dealing with trends which I think probably have accelerated over this period. Because we're moving into such an uncertain territory, the number of challenges are very large. But if I were to single out perhaps the most complicated and significant of the challenges that we face, I would say it is developing and implementing a new framework for dealing with China, for our relationship with China. Because it's now clear that hope for the best engagement is not a sufficient policy framework for our relationships with China, nor in my view is containment, which I think is ultimately a policy dead end in dealing with a country of China's economic significance and its level of integration into the global economy, irrespective of how much of globalization may be truncated in a post-COVID world. So how we arrive at that new framework, what it will mean particularly for an Indo-Pacific region which will be much more multipolar into the future than what we've been used to. And what is the best way of constructing a new strategic equilibrium? I think this is going to be the work of a generation, frankly. It's not something that will happen quickly. But I think in many respects, it's going to require a collective effort, because it seems to me that countries like Australia are not alone in wanting to find a way to deal with our challenges. And that includes to deal with a pattern of Chinese behavior, which in recent years has become much more assertive, much more strident, exercising an element of coercion, which I think is quite worrying for many countries. And the abandonment of hide and bide as a framing reference for Chinese policy, I think, has been a very significant development, and one that we will have to come to grips with. So I'd see that as the single most important challenges, but one of many challenges I think that we will face.
High Commissioner, you know, the impact that the pandemic has had has also been on the economy across the globe. And there has been talk of recession, most certainly talk of an economic shutdown in certain cases. How do you see countries recovering from this shock, so to speak? Do you see them becoming more insular, more protectionist, or would you see them embracing and opening up in order to accelerate economic growth and prosperity?
Well, I think probably the economic consequences may prove to be the most serious consequences of COVID, because they will be medium and long term. I mean, you cannot hit the global economy in the way that COVID has without paying quite a significant economic price. And even if some of our economies emerge from COVID relatively rapidly, And even if on the most optimistic assumption, some of us face a V-shaped recovery, although I think the alphabet simile is likely to be a little bit more complicated than a V. We will have to deal with a number of trends. The first is that COVID, I think, has made us psychologically more inward looking when it comes to matters economic. So before COVID, we were already seeing signs of populism in many countries. We were seeing protectionism on the rise. After COVID, I suspect those trends will get even stronger. And one thing that I'm particularly concerned about is that the merits of an open economy are now under much greater questioning in the politics of many of our countries. Now, for Australia, our prosperity, our unbroken record of economic growth, in my view, has been a direct consequence of our willingness to open up our economy, to engage with the global trading system, to encourage international investment, to encourage our own companies to benchmark their performance against best practice around the world. When I look around now, I see the siren calls of protectionism getting louder. I see concepts of self-sufficiency attracting much greater political attention. I think the idea that there is something essentially vulnerable about global supply chains, if carried too far, can be quite dangerous and indeed could well lead us into a period of very, very sluggish economic growth and therefore lower and lower standard of living. So re-prosecuting the case for an open economy, which in many of our countries has taken quite a long time, I think is going to become vitally important, and it will need a new vocabulary. I don't think we can just return to the debates that we had about globalization and opening up our economies. I think we're going to have to find a new way of pitching and explaining this to electorates that are probably increasingly skeptical about it. And part of that endeavor also involves finding ways to revitalize the global institutions that underpin our economic success, and probably none more important than the World Trade Organization. Yeah. And so finding a way to revitalize the World Trade Organization, getting the trade liberalization agenda back on track, ensuring that we can redefine a system that is rules-based when it comes to trade disputes, that countries are willing to put that to a jurisdiction such as the WTO, and in our own national policies, pursuing policies that are respectful of market forces, but obviously also recognizing that the ultimate responsibility of government is to ensure social cohesion and a certain degree of fairness in the way in which the fruits of economic development are enjoyed by everyone in the community. So none of those issues per se are new, but I think the environment in which we're going to have to navigate them and the politics of it, in particular for democracies such as India and Australia, I think are going to get much more complicated, because I do think there is a risk of populism attracting much more support than it deserves. And in my simplistic view, populism is when bad policy becomes good politics, and that leads you to some rather dangerous ends.
Thank you so much, Excellency. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. We live, as someone once said, in interesting times.